I stood alone in our half-empty apartment on what should have been the happiest day of my life, my wedding day. Instead of celebrating with family, I was abandoned because my parents refused to attend, claiming Jessica wasn't good enough for their social circle. The tuxedo I'd spent weeks choosing hung perfectly on my frame, but the weight of their absence crushed my chest. After years of emotional manipulation and conditional love, this final rejection broke something in me. That day, through tears I wouldn't let fall, I made a life-changing decision to cut ties with my toxic family and build my own success. Little did I know that 3 years later, my revenge would arrive in the form of a luxury car. Growing up in Boston's elite social circles wasn't the privilege everyone imagines. From my earliest memories, our family name came attached to expectations that felt like shackles. My father, Harold, a tall, imposing man with permanently furrowed brows, ran a successful investment firm that catered exclusively to old money. My mother, Eleanor, with her perpetually perfect hair and calculating eyes, orchestrated our social calendar like a military campaign. Our 5-bedroom brownstone in Beacon Hill was less a home and more a showroom for their accomplishments. Dinner conversations revolved around stock portfolios, country club memberships, and which families were worth knowing. My report cards weren't celebrations of learning, but inspections for weakness. An A- wasn't cause for congratulations, but for scheduling additional tutoring. Maynard, my father would say, swirling his bourbon as he reviewed my transcript. Mediocrity is a choice made by people without vision. Daltons aren't mediocre. I excelled through high school and into Princeton, not because I loved learning, but because failure wasn't an option. While classmates discovered passions and dreams, I fulfilled expectations. My genuine interest in computer science was dismissed as a hobby, while my finance major was treated as the only acceptable path. Computers are for the help desk people, son, my father said when I mentioned coding. We employ those types. We don't become them. When I graduated with honors and joined a prestigious financial firm, arranged through my father's connections, of course, the achievement was treated as merely meeting the minimum standard. The crushing pressure to perform perfect impressions of success left little room for authentic relationships. That all changed when I met Jessica. She worked as a kindergarten teacher at a school where I was reluctantly fulfilling board member obligations, another box checked on my parents' list of appropriate activities. While other volunteers checked their watches and kept interaction with the children to a minimum, Jessica noticed me genuinely enjoying reading time with the kids. "You're actually good at this," she said during a break, her smile reaching her warm brown eyes. "Most suits who come through that door are counting the minutes until they can leave. Maybe I'm just better at hiding it," I joked, though something about her directness was refreshing. "Nope. Those 5-year-olds are human lie detectors. You passed their test." Something about her straightforward kindness felt like coming up for air after being underwater too long. Our coffee after the volunteer session turned into dinner, which became a relationship built on something I'd rarely experienced: genuine acceptance. Jessica's middle-class family welcomed me without question. Sunday dinners at their modest home in Somerville featured loud conversations, genuine laughter, and not a single mention of net worth or social connections. Her father, Tom, a plumber, and mother, Susan, a nurse, measured success in happiness and kindness rather than dollars and influence. When I proposed to Jessica after 18 months together, it was the first decision I'd made without calculating my parents' reaction. Their response was immediate and harsh. "A kindergarten teacher?" My mother's voice dripped with disdain during our dinner at their home. "Darling, surely this is just a phase. You can't seriously expect us to announce this match to the Prestons or the Cabots. She's educated, kind, and makes me happy," I said, feeling a strange new courage. "Happy?" My father nearly spat the word. "Marriage isn't about happy, son. It's about appropriate connections and maintaining standards. Your children will have a public school teacher's genetics, for God's sake." The months leading to our wedding were a war of attrition. My parents deployed every weapon in their arsenal, from guilt to threats of disinheritance. When they realized I wouldn't budge, they switched tactics, insisting on an extravagant wedding at the plaza that would have made Jessica uncomfortable. We declined, choosing instead a meaningful ceremony at her family's church, followed by a reception at a waterfront restaurant we both loved. The night before our wedding, my phone rang. My mother's voice was cold and final. "Your father and I have discussed it thoroughly. We won't be attending tomorrow. If you insist on making this mistake, you'll do so without our blessing or presence." I'd expected it, but the finality still felt like a physical blow. "I understand," was all I could manage. "I don't think you do," she continued. "The Hastings annual charity gala is tomorrow evening. People who matter will notice if we're absent. Your wedding is your choice. But don't expect us to damage relationships we've spent decades building." My best friend Tyler stepped in as my best man, his righteous anger on my behalf somehow more comforting than sympathy. Jessica's family surrounded me with warmth, her father even taking me aside before the ceremony. "Their loss, son," he said simply, straightening my tie. "You're family now, and we don't miss important days." The wedding was beautiful in its authenticity. Jessica took my breath away, and the celebration was filled with genuine joy. I almost managed to forget the empty seats in the front row where parents of the groom should have been. Almost. Until my phone vibrated during the reception. A text from my mother contained a photo of my parents in evening wear, glasses raised at what was clearly the charity gala. The caption read simply, "Some events take priority." I showed it to Tyler, who suggested several anatomically impossible acts my parents could perform. But something shifted in me at that moment. The last thread of hope that they might someday accept my choices snapped clean, replaced by a resolve I'd never felt before. I deleted the message, turned off my phone, and rejoined my bride for our first dance, determined that this would be the last time my parents would have the power to dim my happiness. The first months of marriage were a strange mix of joy and grief. Jessica and I built our new life together, learning each other's habits and creating our own traditions. But the absence of my family left a wound that would unexpectedly reopen at random moments, when seeing fathers walking daughters down store aisles, or during holidays when Jessica's family tried so hard to fill the obvious gap. "They'll come around," Jessica's mother would say kindly, though her eyes held doubt. "Maybe they won't," I finally admitted one night as Jessica and I lay in bed in our apartment. "And maybe that's okay." She propped herself up on one elbow, studying my face in the dim light. "Are you sure?" "No," I laughed softly. "But I'm starting to think that building something new might be better than trying to fix something that was never really whole to begin with." This realization coincided with growing dissatisfaction at my job. The finance position my father had arranged through connections had always felt like an extension of his control. Every promotion or bonus seemed tainted by the knowledge that my colleagues whispered about nepotism behind my back. 3 months after our wedding, I made a decision that would have been unthinkable before meeting Jessica. "I want to quit," I told her one evening. "Start something of my own." Instead of panic, her face showed curiosity. "Doing what?" I hesitated before revealing the secret passion I'd kept hidden from almost everyone. "Software development. I've been coding since college, building apps at night. I have ideas that could work, but it would mean starting from zero." "Zero sounds like a pretty good place to start something authentic," she said without hesitation. We downsized from our already modest apartment to an even smaller one in Medford. Jessica picked up extra tutoring hours after school, and I cashed out my 401k to fund the initial months of my startup. My parents would have been horrified at the financial risk, but for the first time, their opinion wasn't factored into my equation. The startup life was nothing like the sanitized entrepreneurial success stories featured in business magazines. Our tiny apartment became command central, with our dining table doubling as my desk. I worked 18-hour days, fueled by convenience store coffee and Jessica's unfailing belief in my abilities. For every small victory, there were dozens of setbacks. Potential investors would grow interested upon hearing my concept, a security platform that simplified complex protocols for small businesses, only to back away when they learned I had no major backing or industry connections. "Your idea has merit," one venture capitalist told me bluntly. But you're nobody. Come back when you've got a name behind you. 6 months in, our savings were dwindling. Jessica never complained, but I saw the worry in her eyes when she thought I wasn't looking. We cut expenses to the bone. No eating out, no new clothes, shopping only store brands. I started doubting myself, wondering if my parents had been right about my capabilities all along. Late one night, after another rejection email from a potential investor, I sat staring at my code through burning, tired eyes. Jessica appeared beside me in her worn pajamas, setting down 2 mugs of tea. Maybe they were right, I said quietly. Maybe I'm not cut out for success on my own terms. Is that your voice or theirs? She asked. The question hit me like a bucket of cold water. I'd left my parents physically, but was still carrying their doubts within me. Jessica put her hand over mine on the keyboard. The Maynard I married doesn't quit when things get hard. He gets creative. The next morning, I completely reimagined my approach. Instead of chasing big investors, I reached out directly to small business owners, offering free trials of my security software. The feedback was immediate and valuable. They loved the concept, but needed specific features I hadn't considered. I coded through nights and weekends, iterating rapidly based on real-world input rather than speculative pitches. Tyler, who worked in tech public relations, helped spread word about the platform through his professional network. Small businesses began signing up for the paid version. Not enough to make us wealthy, but enough to keep the lights on and the project moving forward. 1 year after quitting my finance job, I was exhausted but making progress. Jessica and I were barely keeping our heads above water financially, but there was a dignity in the struggle that felt more valuable than the hollow success I'd known before. Then came the lowest point. A server crash wiped out 36 hours of critical code updates right before a major release. At the same time, our ancient car finally died, and Jessica caught the flu so severely she missed a week of work, cutting our income further. I stayed up 3 nights straight rebuilding the lost code, surviving on energy drinks and sheer determination. On the 3rd night, delirious with fatigue, I must have fallen asleep at the keyboard. I woke to Jessica's hand on my shoulder and sunlight streaming through our blinds. "Check your email," she said, her voice strange. Bleary-eyed, I opened my inbox to find a message from TechShield, one of the largest cybersecurity companies in the country. Assuming it was just another form rejection, I almost deleted it. The subject line read, "Interest in acquisition of your platform." I clicked it open, certain I was still dreaming. The CEO had apparently heard about my software through a small business client who happened to be his brother-in-law. He was impressed with the user interface and innovative approach to making complex security accessible. They wanted to discuss acquiring my company. The number mentioned in the email had so many zeros I had to read it 3 times. I looked up at Jessica, who was smiling through tears. "Is this real?" I whispered. "I've read it 7 times while you were sleeping." She nodded. "It's real." In that moment, standing in our tiny apartment with second-hand furniture and past-due notices on the counter, everything changed. Not just our financial future, but my understanding of what true success meant. I'd built something valuable not through connections or family influence, but through perseverance and authentic work. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of timing, and possibly a sense of humor. The acquisition process moved with surprising speed. TechShield wanted not just my software, but me as part of their development team, with significant creative control over the platform's future. The initial offer was $7 million, plus stock options and a generous salary. When the final paperwork was signed, Jessica and I sat in our car outside the lawyer's office in complete silence for several minutes. "We should celebrate," she finally said. "Champagne? Fancy dinner?" I suggested, still in a state of disbelief. She thought for a moment, then smiled. "Ice cream. From that place by the harbor we could never afford. And let's eat it on the pier." That night, as we sat on a bench watching boats with our overpriced ice cream cones, we made decisions about our new reality. "We're not telling anyone about the money," I said firmly. "Not right away." Jessica nodded. No sudden mansions or sports cars. Nothing that screams, "Look at us. I want to earn this," I explained. Prove to myself that it wasn't just luck. And I definitely don't want my parents finding out and suddenly deciding I'm worth their time again. We moved forward with intention rather than impulse. I invested most of the money with a financial advisor Tyler recommended, ironically implementing the financial knowledge I'd gained in my previous career. But now, on my own terms. We moved from our tiny apartment, but not to an ostentatious house in the suburbs. Instead, we found a comfortable 3-bedroom in a diverse neighborhood we loved, with good schools and a sense of community. Jessica continued teaching kindergarten, not from financial necessity but because she genuinely loved her work. "Money doesn't change the fact that helping those kids learn to read is what I'm meant to do," she said. I respected her commitment even more, knowing she could have quit at any time. Working with TechShield proved challenging, but fulfilling. Free from financial pressure, I could focus on innovation rather than survival. My team expanded, and our security platform reached thousands more businesses. I started a second venture focused on educational technology, combining Jessica's classroom insights with my development skills. Our personal lives blossomed alongside our professional ones. After 2 years of marriage, we decided to start a family. Jessica's pregnancy was relatively smooth, though the 3rd trimester brought enough discomfort that she finally agreed to cut back her teaching hours. Lucas James was born on a Tuesday morning in October. Holding him for the first time, I felt a fierce protectiveness unlike anything I'd experienced before. This tiny person would grow up knowing unconditional love and support, never questioning his worth based on achievements or connections. Jessica's parents were ecstatic first-time grandparents who showed up with home-cooked meals and boundless willingness to help. The absence of my own parents was a dull ache that occasionally sharpened when I imagined my father holding his grandson or my mother singing him to sleep. But Lucas filled our home with so much joy that the empty spaces seemed to matter less. When Jessica was ready to return to teaching part-time, I wanted to give her something special. Not just as a push present, but as recognition of her unwavering support through our hardest times. She had always admired Teslas, not for the status but for their environmental impact and innovation. "This is insane," she protested when I showed her the white Model X in our driveway, complete with a blue bow on top. "It's practical," I argued with a grin. "Safest car on the market for our son. Plus, no gas expenses ever again. I'm being financially responsible." The car cost $164,000, more than we would have made in 3 years during our startup struggle. Jessica drove it reluctantly at first, then with increasing enjoyment, especially when using it to carpool with other teachers who appreciated the environmental aspect. 3 months after Lucas was born, we took a family photo in front of our home. Jessica holding Lucas, me with my arm around them both, and yes, the Tesla visible in the background. It wasn't staged to showcase the car. It just happened to be parked there. I posted it on Facebook with the caption, "3 months with this little guy. Every day an adventure." I hadn't posted much since disconnecting from my parents' world, and my friend list was carefully curated to exclude family connections. But social media has a way of bridging even intentional gaps. A mutual acquaintance must have shared the photo, because exactly 2 days later, my phone rang with a number I hadn't seen in 3 years. My mother's voice, unchanged by time, came through the speaker. "Maynard, this is your mother," as if I wouldn't recognize her. "Your father and I need to speak with you immediately. Where did you get the money for that car? We're having a family meeting tomorrow at 2. You will attend." Not hello, not how are you, not congratulations on your child, just demands and assumptions of compliance. Exactly as I remembered. I found myself oddly calm as I replied, "I have a previous engagement tomorrow." "Cancel it," she said flatly. "This is more important. Your Uncle Arthur has also seen the photo and has questions. The family is concerned." Family. The word sounded hollow coming from someone who had missed my wedding, the birth of my child, and everything in between. "I'll check my calendar and let you know," I said, then ended the call before she could respond. Jessica found me staring at my phone in the nursery. Who was that? You look like you've seen a ghost. Not a ghost. Just the past, I said quietly. My mother called about the Tesla. After 3 years of silence, she called about a car? Jessica's indignation on my behalf was immediate. Apparently, the family is concerned about where the money came from, I said, the absurdity suddenly striking me as darkly funny. Are you going to meet them? I looked down at Lucas, sleeping peacefully in his crib, unaware of complicated family histories and conditional love. Yes, I decided, but not for the reasons they think. After 3 years of silence, I was finally ready to close this chapter properly. On my terms, not theirs. The drive to my parents' Beacon Hill home felt surreal. Streets and landmarks I'd once known intimately now seemed like locations from someone else's life. Jessica sat beside me in the passenger seat of the Tesla. We'd decided to bring the subject of controversy, while Lucas slept in his car seat, blissfully unaware of the tension surrounding him. We can still turn around, Jessica offered, reaching over to squeeze my hand on the steering wheel. No, I said with more confidence than I felt. This has been unfinished business for too long. We'd discussed our approach extensively. Jessica had wanted to stay home with Lucas, protecting him from potential negativity, but I insisted we present ourselves as a united family. They don't get to meet my son while pretending you don't exist, I'd told her. The house looked exactly as I remembered. Imposing brownstone facade, meticulously maintained window boxes, brass knocker polished to a perfect shine. What had once represented security now felt like a mausoleum to appearances. Before we could even ring the bell, the door swung open. My mother stood there, her critical gaze sweeping over us. Her eyes lingered on the Tesla parked prominently at the curb, before settling on Lucas in Jessica's arms. You brought the baby, she said, her tone making it clear this wasn't the plan. And, Jessica, how unexpected. My family comes with me, I said simply, stepping past her into the foyer without waiting for a proper invitation. The surprise awaiting in the formal living room sent a jolt through me. Not just my parents, but a full gathering of extended family. Uncle Arthur and Aunt Sophia, my father's sister Marion and her husband Richard, and my cousin Derek with his wife Claudia. All the family that had been conspicuously absent from my wedding, now assembled like a tribunal. Quite the production for a simple conversation, I observed, keeping my voice deliberately light. My father rose from his armchair, still commanding at 62 with silver hair and the same critical eyes I remembered. This isn't a production, it's a family concern. Which family would that be? I asked. Because my family is right here with me. I put my arm around Jessica, who stood tall despite the obvious discomfort of the situation. An awkward silence followed, as Jessica found a seat on a small sofa, arranging Lucas comfortably in her arms. I remained standing, unwilling to settle into the familiar power dynamics of this room. Perhaps we should speak privately, my father suggested, glancing meaningfully at Jessica. There's nothing you can't say in front of my wife, I replied. The word wife seemed to cause a collective wince among the assembled relatives. My father's jaw tightened. Very well. Let's not waste time with pleasantries. We've seen your display on social media. A $164,000 vehicle is quite a statement for someone who disappeared from a promising financial career 3 years ago. We have questions about the source of this sudden wealth. The directness was so typical of him. No greeting, no acknowledgement of his grandson, just straight to the accusation thinly veiled as concern. You think I've done something illegal, I stated rather than asked. That's why the family council has been assembled. To what end? An intervention? An inquisition? Don't be dramatic, Maynard, my mother interjected. We're concerned. People in our circle have noticed. There are rumors. About what? That your son might be successful without your guidance? How terrifying that must be for you. Aunt Sophia leaned forward, her expression a practiced mixture of concern and condescension I remembered well from childhood scoldings. Darling, you must understand. You left a prestigious position arranged by your father. Then nothing for years. Now, suddenly, expensive cars, and a home purchase we've learned about through back channels. Back channels, I repeated, the realization dawning. You've been having me investigated. My father didn't deny it. We have connections who keep us informed. Your decision to cut us out doesn't change our responsibility to the family name. I laughed, the sound surprising even me. The family name. That's what this is about? Not concern for me, certainly not interest in meeting your grandson. Just protecting the precious Dalton reputation. Derek, my cousin who had always mirrored my father's worst qualities, spoke up. Don't act so persecuted, Maynard. You're the one who went off the grid, then suddenly reappeared flaunting wealth. What were we supposed to think? That you're some tech genius who made millions overnight? His sarcastic question hit ironically close to the truth. Actually, I started, but was interrupted by my mother. Whatever you've gotten yourself into, we can help fix it discreetly, she said, her voice lowered as if neighbors might be listening through the walls. Your father still has connections who can manage situations like this. Situations like what, exactly? Jessica spoke for the first time, her voice steady despite being surrounded by these strangers who had rejected her without ever knowing her. My father turned to her with a dismissive glance. Financial irregularities. We assume Maynard has taken some shortcuts to maintain a lifestyle beyond his means, perhaps to impress certain people. The implication hung in the air, aimed directly at Jessica. I felt heat rising in my face, but before I could respond, Uncle Arthur cleared his throat. Harold, Eleanor, I think we should be direct. The family is concerned that Maynard may have become involved in something illegal to acquire sudden wealth. If that's the case, it could affect all of us. I stared at them, these people who shared my blood, but who had never truly known me. You think I'm what? Embezzling? Dealing drugs? Running a Ponzi scheme? Based on a Facebook photo of a car? Where there's smoke, Aunt Marion began. But I cut her off. There's a family looking for a fire sale, I finished. That's what this is really about, isn't it? An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. My father and Uncle Arthur exchanged glances that confirmed my suspicion. I turned to my father directly. What happened to the firm? More silence. Then finally, my father cleared his throat. There have been some challenges. Challenges, I repeated. Translate that from Dalton speak for me. Your father's investment firm has experienced significant setbacks, my mother said carefully. Some clients have made unfortunate accusations regarding management of certain funds. He's being investigated for securities fraud. I translated, watching my father's face. His expression confirmed it without words. And suddenly, you're interested in reconnecting with your estranged son, who appears to have money. How convenient. That's unfair, Maynard, my father said, a flash of genuine hurt crossing his features that almost made me doubt my interpretation. Almost. Yes, there are legal complications, but this meeting was called because we genuinely want to understand what's happening in your life. Jessica shifted Lucas in her arms as he began to fuss. The movement drew my mother's attention, and for a moment, her carefully maintained facade cracked as she looked at her grandson. May I? She asked hesitantly, extending her arms toward Lucas. Jessica glanced at me, a question in her eyes. I gave a small nod, and she carefully handed our son to my mother. The room fell silent as Eleanor Dalton held her grandson for the first time, studying his features. He has your father's eyes, she murmured, and your chin. For a moment, I allowed myself to imagine an alternate reality, one where my parents had been at our wedding, had visited us in the hospital when Lucas was born, had been part of our lives all along. The ache of what might have been was surprisingly sharp. But then Derek broke the spell. So, are we going to address the elephant in the room? Where did the money come from, Maynard? Because if you're in trouble, and it blows back on the family, we deserve to know. The moment of connection shattered. I took Lucas back from my mother, feeling the weight of 3 years of silence and 32 years of conditional acceptance. I developed a security software platform, I said simply. It was acquired by TechShield 2 years ago. I now work for them as lead developer, while running my own educational technology venture on the side. Everything is thoroughly legal, documented, and successful without any input from the Dalton name or connections. The expressions around the room shifted from suspicion to surprise, then, most tellingly, to calculation. I could almost see the gears turning as they processed this information, not as a celebration of my success, but as a potential resource. "Well," my father said after a moment, his tone shifting to one I recognized from business negotiations. "That's certainly a relief to hear. You should have told us, son. We would have been proud." "Would you?" I asked quietly. "Or would you have found a way to diminish it, because it wasn't the path you chose for me?" Before he could answer, I noticed a legal document partially concealed beneath a newspaper on the coffee table. The header was visible: Dalton, Investment, Recovery, Strategy. My father followed my gaze and quickly covered it completely, but not before I saw my name listed among potential resources. The pieces clicked into place. This wasn't a family reunion. It was a fundraising mission. "How bad is it?" I asked, directing the question to my father. "The legal trouble. The firm." He hesitated, then sighed heavily. "Bad. The SEC investigation has frozen most assets. Legal fees are mounting. There's talk of criminal charges if we can't make restitution to certain clients. And you thought I might be a solution," I concluded. "Not a son to reconcile with, but a financial lifeline." "That's not fair," my mother protested, but her eyes wouldn't meet mine. "Isn't it?" I countered. 3 years of silence. "You missed my wedding, the birth of your grandson, every holiday and birthday. But one photo suggesting I have money, and suddenly a family meeting is called. Not to apologize or rebuild bridges, to assess my value to the family balance sheet." The silence that followed was damning. Even Derek had the grace to look uncomfortable. I stood, signaling to Jessica that we were leaving. "I have my answer. Thank you for your honesty, if nothing else." "Maynard, don't be hasty," my father said, rising as well. "Yes, we have concerns about the business, but this is also about reconnecting. You're still a Dalton. Family stands together in difficult times." "Family," I repeated. "You keep using that word. I don't think it means what you think it means." Jessica had already gathered Lucas and our belongings, reading my signals perfectly as she always did. As we moved toward the door, my mother called after us. "What about Lucas? Don't you want him to know his grandparents?" I paused, turning back to face the assembled family. "What I want is for Lucas to know what genuine love and support feel like. When you're ready to offer that without conditions or calculations, you can call me. Until then, we'll continue building our lives without you." As we walked out the front door, I felt strangely lighter than when we'd arrived. The confrontation I'd dreaded for years had finally happened, and I'd survived. More than survived. I'd stood my ground on my own terms. In the car, Jessica reached for my hand. "Are you okay?" Better than okay, I realized. For the first time in my life, I think I'm truly free. What I didn't know was that this freedom would be challenged again. And soon, the Dalton family had never taken rejection well, and they weren't finished with us yet. The next morning, just as Jessica was preparing to leave for school with Lucas headed to daycare, my phone rang. It was my father's private line, a number I'd once been instructed to use only for genuine emergencies. "I'd like to meet." "Just the two of us," he said without preamble when I answered. "Man to man, no family politics." Jessica watched my expression as I considered his request. After our confrontation yesterday, I was wary, but something in his voice, a vulnerability I'd rarely heard, gave me pause. 1 hour. "The coffee shop on Commonwealth," I conceded. "I have a meeting at 11 that I won't reschedule." "Thank you, son," he said, the gratitude in his voice seeming almost genuine. The coffee shop was neutral territory, public enough to discourage drama, but quiet enough for private conversation. I arrived early, securing a corner table and ordering a black coffee that I didn't touch. My father arrived precisely on time, looking uncharacteristically disheveled. His tailored suit was immaculate as always, but his eyes carried the shadows of sleepless nights. He ordered an espresso and sat heavily across from me. For a moment he seemed at a loss for words, a first in my experience with Harold Dalton, master negotiator. "The firm is gone," he finally said, his voice barely audible. 30 years of work, ended. The SEC has frozen everything, including personal accounts. Your mother and I may lose the house. Despite everything, I felt a pang of empathy. My father had defined himself through his business success for as long as I could remember. "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. "That must be difficult. More than difficult." He rubbed his face with one hand. "It's the end of everything we built. Your mother is devastated. The social humiliation alone." He trailed off, then looked at me directly. "I've never asked you for anything, Maynard." The absurdity of that statement almost made me laugh. My entire childhood had been one long series of demands and expectations. "What exactly are you asking for now?" I kept my voice neutral. "A loan. Just until we get back on our feet. 2 million would clear the most pressing debts and give us breathing room to negotiate with the authorities. 2 million. The figure hung between us. Not a small request by any measure. "That's a significant amount," I observed. "It's a family obligation," he replied, his vulnerable tone shifting subtly toward the authoritative voice I knew so well. "Your mother and I gave you every advantage. The best schools, connections, opportunities most people can only dream of. And when I chose a path you didn't select, you cut me out completely. We were disappointed," he acknowledged. "But we're still your parents. There's a duty there that transcends disagreements." I studied him, trying to see beyond the practiced persuasion to whatever genuine feeling might exist. "If I had come to you 3 years ago, struggling to launch my business, would you have loaned me 2 million? He didn't answer immediately, which was answer enough. "I need to think about it," I said finally. "There isn't much time," he pressed. "The creditors are circling. Your mother may have to sell her mother's jewelry collection." The calculated mention of my grandmother's treasured pieces, which my mother had always promised would one day go to my wife, wasn't subtle. I stood, leaving my untouched coffee. "I'll let you know my decision by the end of the week." As I turned to leave, he called after me. "We've told the Prestons and Cabots that you're stepping in to help. The announcement has already calmed some waters." I froze, then turned back slowly. "You told people I was giving you money before asking me?" He had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "We were confident in your sense of family duty." I said nothing more, simply walked out into the bright morning, my thoughts churning. The manipulation was so familiar it almost felt like coming home, a sensation that disturbed me deeply. By the time I reached my office, 3 messages waited on my phone. One from my mother, one from Aunt Sophia, and one from Uncle Arthur, all suggesting various levels of family obligation and subtly reminding me of childhood kindnesses I supposedly owed them for. I was still processing this coordinated campaign when Tyler called. My friend since college, he now worked in tech public relations and had connections throughout the industry. "We need to talk," he said, his tone serious. "Are you sitting down?" "What's happened?" I asked, immediately alert. "Your father has been reaching out to investors in the Boston tech scene, claiming he provided seed funding for your startup and advised on your acquisition deal." "What?" I nearly shouted. "That's completely false. He had nothing to do with it." "I know that," Tyler assured me. "But he's leveraging your success to restore credibility to the Dalton name in investment circles. He's implying he was the strategic mind behind your exit strategy." I thanked Tyler for the warning and immediately called my lawyer, Susan Blackwell. She confirmed what I already suspected. My father was attempting to create an impression of involvement that could potentially lead to legal claims against my assets. "We should send a cease and desist," she advised. "Make it clear there was no financial or advisory relationship." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with another call. "Jessica, your mother just called my parents," she said without preamble, her voice tight with anger. "She offered them $50,000 if they would help Jessica understand the importance of family financial support." "She what?" I felt physically ill. She told my dad that if I convinced you to do the right thing, there would be compensation for their trouble. My father hung up on her. I closed my eyes, leaning back in my chair as the full scope of my family's desperation became clear. They weren't just asking for help. They were mobilizing every possible pressure point, including attempting to manipulate Jessica's family. "I'm sorry," I said, inadequate words for the boundary violation. "It's not your fault," Jessica assured me. "But Maynard, these people, they're toxic. I'm worried about what they'll try next." Her concern proved prophetic. That evening, as we were putting Lucas to bed, our doorbell rang insistently. Jessica peered through the peephole, then stepped back with a shocked expression. "It's your parents." Both of them. We hadn't given them our address. The fact that they'd found it was disturbing but not entirely surprising, given their earlier admission of having us investigated. I opened the door to find my father and mother standing there with bright, artificial smiles. My mother held a large gift bag with tissue paper sprouting from the top. "Surprise visit," she announced with forced cheer. "We brought something for our grandson." Before I could respond, they moved past me into our home as if they'd been invited. My mother immediately began examining our living room, her eyes cataloging each item with the critical assessment I remembered from childhood. "Lovely home," she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "Cozy." My father set down an overnight bag I hadn't noticed he was carrying. The implication was clear. They intended to stay. "You can't just show up unannounced," I said, finding my voice. "And you certainly can't stay here." "Don't be ridiculous, darling." My mother waved dismissively. "We're family, and we've hardly had any time with Lucas." "Whose fault is that?" Jessica asked quietly from the doorway, where she stood protectively. My mother ignored her, pulling an extravagant stuffed elephant from the gift bag. "Where is my precious grandson? Grandma has presents." "He's sleeping," I said firmly. "And even if he weren't, this isn't how this works. You don't get to appear after 3 years and declare yourself grandparents of the year." "We've made mistakes," my father acknowledged, his tone reasonable in a way that had always preceded his most effective manipulations. "But we're trying to make amends. Isn't that what matters?" "Amends don't come with overnight bags and presumptions," I countered. My mother's pleasant facade cracked slightly. "We've already told Lucas we'll be staying for a while to get to know him. We showed him pictures of our guest room at home and promised he could visit next." The realization struck me with stunning clarity. "You haven't met Lucas. You've never spoken to him. You're lying about having a relationship with my son." My parents exchanged glances, and in that look, I saw the truth. They were so accustomed to reshaping reality to suit their needs that the lie had come naturally. "We're his grandparents," my father stated, as if this fact alone granted all permissions. "We have rights. You have exactly the rights I choose to give you when it comes to my son," I said, my voice deadly quiet. "And right now, that's none." My mother's expression hardened. "Be reasonable, Maynard. Your father and I are simply trying to rebuild our relationship during a difficult time. We've already told our friends we're staying with you, while the house is being renovated." Another lie. More social theater. "You need to leave," I said, moving toward the door and opening it wide. "This isn't over," my father warned, making no move to go. "We have options." "So do I replied, pulling out my phone. "I can call the police and report trespassers, or you can leave voluntarily. Your choice." The standoff lasted several tense seconds before my mother gathered her purse with a huff. "This is how you treat family? After everything we've done for you?" "This is how I protect my family," I corrected her. "My real family." My father collected the overnight bag, his expression darkening. "You'll regret this approach, son. There are consequences to choosing the wrong side in family matters." After they finally left, Jessica and I checked on Lucas, both of us needing the reassurance of seeing him sleeping peacefully, unaware of the chaos surrounding him. As I looked down at my son, I made a decision that had been forming since the moment my mother's call had broken 3 years of silence. "It's time to end this," I told Jessica. "Completely." She nodded, understanding without explanation. "What's the plan?" I'm going to give them exactly what they deserve, I said. No more, no less. Over the next week, the pressure intensified. My parents began telling mutual acquaintances that they were helping their son through a difficult business transition, implying my success was faltering. Distant relatives called with veiled threats about family loyalty. My father approached several of my business partners, introducing himself as my financial advisor. Then came the most disturbing development. Tyler called to warn me that someone claiming to represent Dalton family interests had contacted TechShield's board, suggesting there might be intellectual property questions about my original software. They're trying to threaten my company now, I told Jessica that night, creating doubt about the legitimacy of everything I've built. She sat beside me on our couch, Lucas asleep in her arms. They won't stop, will they? Not until they get what they want or destroy what they can't have. No, I agreed. They won't stop on their own. Which means I have to stop them. I spent the next 3 days consulting with lawyers, financial advisors, and security professionals. What emerged was a comprehensive plan, not born of vengeance, but of clarity. Not to hurt my family, but to finally set firm, unbreakable boundaries that would protect the family I had chosen and created. The pieces were in place. The surprise I had planned for my parents was ready. What they didn't realize was that the real surprise wouldn't be what they received, but what they would lose in the process. The breaking point came on a Wednesday afternoon. I was in a meeting with potential investors for my educational technology venture, when my assistant interrupted with an urgent message. Lucas's daycare was calling. I stepped out immediately, my heart racing with parental worry. "Mr. Dalton," the daycare director said, her voice strained. "There's been an incident. Your mother attempted to pick up Lucas, claiming to be on your approved list. When we refused, she became insistent. Security had to escort her from the premises. Ice flooded my veins. Is Lucas okay?" "He's fine, just a bit confused by the commotion. We've moved him to the director's office as a precaution." I thanked her, assured her I'd be there within 20 minutes, and ended the call. As I gathered my things to leave, another call came through. Jessica, her voice tight with controlled fury. "Your father just showed up at my school. He cornered me in the parking lot, insisting we need to be reasonable about family matters. When I tried to leave, he blocked my car door." "Are you safe?" I demanded, already heading for the elevator. "Yes." The school security guard intervened. "But, Maynard, this is escalating. They're showing up at our workplaces now." By the time I reached the daycare, Jessica had already arrived. Lucas ran to me when I entered the director's office, blissfully unaware of the situation's gravity. I held him tightly, exchanging a look with Jessica over his head that communicated everything words couldn't. "I've already called Susan," she said, referring to our lawyer. "She's preparing emergency restraining orders." That evening, after Lucas was asleep, we sat at our kitchen table reviewing security measures. We'd changed the locks, installed cameras, and notified both our workplaces about potential unwanted visitors. The daycare had removed Lucas from their online photo system as a precaution and implemented special protocols for his pickup. "I never thought it would come to this," I admitted, the weight of the situation settling heavily on me. "This isn't your fault," Jessica said firmly. "You didn't create their entitlement or desperation." My phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. "Found something. Call me as soon as possible." When I called, his news confirmed my worst suspicions. "Your father filed paperwork claiming to be a silent founding partner in your original startup," Tyler explained. "He's asserting that he provided consulting that was integral to your success, entitling him to a percentage of your acquisition proceeds." "That's completely fabricated," I said, though the news didn't surprise me as much as it should have. "We haven't spoken since before I started the company." "I know that, but he's clearly laying groundwork for a legal claim. And there's more. He's been meeting with competitors of TechShield, positioning himself as having insider knowledge of your security platform. The violation went beyond family boundaries now. It threatened everything I'd built professionally, everything I'd worked for." The realization crystallized something in me. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about power and control, the same dynamics that had defined my relationship with my parents throughout my life. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 3 in the morning, I slipped quietly from bed, careful not to wake Jessica, and went to my home office. There, I drafted an email to the team I'd assembled, legal, financial, security, with a simple message: implement, plan boundary, timeline, immediate. By morning, the pieces were in motion. As Jessica prepared breakfast, I explained what I'd set in motion. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, not questioning my decision but making sure I'd considered all implications. "I've never been more certain of anything," I assured her. "It ends today." At precisely 10 o'clock, my parents would be receiving hand-delivered legal documents from our attorney. At the same time, letters would reach each member of the extended family who had participated in the pressure campaign. Business associates who had been approached with false claims would receive clarification, and a very specific financial offer would be presented, one with conditions that would either end this conflict permanently or expose my parents' true priorities beyond any doubt. At 10:30, my phone rang with my father's number. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again immediately, and again. "You're not going to answer?" Jessica asked, watching me silence the phone for the 4th time. "No. For the first time in my life, I'm setting the terms of engagement with my parents. They'll meet me when and where I specify, not at their convenience." I had selected a conference room at our lawyer's office for the meeting scheduled for 3 o'clock. Neutral territory with witnesses and documentation. No more private conversations that could be reinterpreted later to serve their narrative. At 2:55, Jessica squeezed my hand before I entered the building. "Remember who you are," she said simply, "not who they want you to be." The conference room projected exactly the professional atmosphere I'd wanted. My parents were already seated on one side of the table, looking uncharacteristically disheveled. My father's usual commanding presence seemed diminished, and my mother's perfect composure showed cracks around the edges. Beside them sat their lawyer, a man I recognized from my father's firm's events. On my side sat Susan Blackwell, and a financial advisor I trusted. I took my seat calmly, placing a folder on the table before me. "Thank you for coming," I began formally. "I believe you've received the preliminary documents this morning." "This is unnecessary," my father started. "We're family. We shouldn't need lawyers and conference rooms to discuss private matters." "Recent events suggest otherwise," I replied evenly. "Your attempts to claim involvement in my business, approach my investors with false information, contact my wife's family with bribes, and most seriously, attempt to remove my son from his daycare, have made this formal approach essential." My mother flinched at the mention of the daycare incident. "I just wanted to see my grandson," she said, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. "Is that such a crime?" "Attempting to remove a child from secure care under false pretenses is actually legally actionable," Susan interjected smoothly. "But we're here to find a resolution, not escalate." My father's lawyer cleared his throat. "My clients are willing to consider ceasing certain communications in exchange for financial consideration, reflecting family obligations." "I have a counter-proposal," I said, opening my folder. "One with very specific conditions." I slid documents across the table. 3 copies, one for each of them, and one for their lawyer. "I am prepared to provide a one-time payment of $500,000, I stated clearly. "This amount will be placed in a trust with disbursements managed by a third-party fiduciary. It comes with non-negotiable conditions." My father scanned the document, his expression darkening. "These terms are insulting." "They're necessary," I corrected. "First, you will sign legally binding agreements, acknowledging that you had no involvement in my business ventures and retracting any claims made to the contrary. Second, you will maintain a respectful distance from my family. No unannounced visits, no contact with our workplaces, no attempts to see Lucas without our explicit permission." My mother's hands trembled as she read. "You're treating us like criminals." "I'm treating you like people who have demonstrated they don't respect boundaries," I clarified. The third condition is perhaps the most important. You will participate in family counseling if you wish to establish any ongoing relationship with Lucas. Therapy? My father practically spat the word. Daltons don't air private matters with strangers. Then Daltons don't get to have a relationship with my son, I said simply. These aren't negotiations, they're requirements. The room fell silent as the reality sank in. I wasn't asking permission or seeking approval. For perhaps the first time in our relationship, I held the power, and we all knew it. And if we refuse these terms? My father asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Then the restraining orders go into effect immediately. The cease and desist regarding false business claims becomes public record, and you receive nothing. My mother began to cry silently, carefully dabbing her eyes to preserve her makeup. My father stared at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Anger, certainly, but perhaps something else. Respect? Recognition? You've changed, he said finally. I've grown up, I corrected him, became a parent myself, realized what actually matters. Their lawyer requested time to review the documents privately with his clients. As they huddled at the other end of the room, Susan leaned toward me. They'll accept, she predicted quietly. They don't have viable alternatives. She was right. 20 minutes later, my father returned to the table, his expression carefully neutral. We find your terms. Acceptable, he said, the words clearly difficult for him, with one amendment. I waited, expecting a financial counteroffer. We would like to establish regular, scheduled visits with Lucas. Monthly, to start. Supervised, if you insist, but consistent. The request surprised me. It was the one part of the agreement focused on relationship rather than money or legal protection. For the first time, I saw a glimmer of genuine desire for connection, however imperfect. Bi-monthly to start, I countered. After 3 successful supervised visits and the commencement of counseling, we can discuss increasing frequency. He nodded once, a businessman acknowledging a fair compromise. As they signed the documents, I felt no triumph or vindication, just a quiet relief that boundaries were finally being established and recognized. Not just financial or legal boundaries, but emotional ones. For the first time, my parents were seeing me as a separate person, with the right to determine my own path, not just an extension of their expectations and needs. As we prepared to leave, my mother approached me, hesitating before speaking. He looks like you did. Lucas. Around the eyes. Yes, I acknowledged. Jessica says the same thing. I'd like to know him, she said softly. Really know him, not just claim him. That's possible, I told her honestly. But it starts with knowing and respecting me and Jessica first. She nodded, a small gesture, but one that contained more genuine acknowledgement than I'd received in decades. Outside, Jessica waited anxiously. How did it go? She asked, as I emerged. I took her hand, feeling the tension of years beginning to release its grip on my shoulders. It's not over, I said truthfully, but it's a beginning. Maybe not the one I expected, but a real one. As we drove home to Lucas, I realized that the Tesla that had triggered this confrontation had ultimately led to something valuable. Not revenge or triumph, but clarity. The car had been a catalyst for finally addressing what had been broken for so long. Whether my parents could truly change remained to be seen. But I had changed, grown strong enough to protect what mattered most. The family I had chosen and created, bound by love rather than obligation. 6 months passed, each day bringing small but significant shifts in the new reality I had created. The boundaries established that day in the lawyer's office held firm, sometimes tested, but never broken. True to their word, or perhaps constrained by the legal consequences of breaking it, my parents adhered to the visitation schedule we established. The first few supervised visits were awkward, stilted affairs with Lucas sensing the tension despite our efforts to shield him from it. By the third visit, something unexpected began to emerge. Freed from the pressure of financial desperation and forced to engage on terms they couldn't control, My parents started showing glimpses of people I barely recognized, or perhaps had never been allowed to see. My father, reading a picture book to Lucas without checking his phone once. My mother, on the floor, playing with blocks, her designer outfit collecting dust, without apparent concern. Small moments, but revelatory in their authenticity. The family counseling sessions were more challenging. Decades of patterns don't unravel easily, and there were sessions where old dynamics threatened to reassert themselves. But our therapist, Dr. Marshall, was skilled at identifying when conversation veered into manipulation or deflection. The goal isn't to erase the past, she reminded us during a particularly difficult session. It's to acknowledge it honestly, so it doesn't determine the future. My father struggled most with this concept. Acknowledgement meant admitting mistakes, something Harold Dalton had spent a lifetime avoiding. But watching him gradually, painfully, begin to recognize the damage done by conditional love was like witnessing a transformation I'd never believed possible. The financial arrangement worked as designed. The trust provided support without allowing access to lump sums that could be mismanaged. My father's legal troubles with the SEC were resolved through a settlement that allowed him to avoid criminal charges but permanently barred him from the investment industry. The family home was sold, and my parents moved to a comfortable but modest condo. It's actually a relief, my mother confessed during one of our increasingly candid conversations. Maintaining appearances was exhausting. Meanwhile, Jessica and I continued building our lives on our own terms. The educational technology venture flourished, securing a major contract with a nationwide school district. Lucas grew from infant to toddler, his personality emerging as a delightful blend of Jessica's warmth and my analytical nature. Tyler remained a steadfast presence, now godfather to Lucas and a regular at our family gatherings. Jessica's parents continued their role as loving, supportive grandparents, never once mentioning the financial offer my mother had made or holding it against her, as they gradually established a cordial relationship. The real turning point came 9 months after our conference room confrontation. We had invited my parents to Lucas's second birthday party, their first non-supervised event, and their first time interacting with Jessica's family in a social setting. I watched nervously as my father approached Tom, Jessica's dad, uncertain how the men would interact. To my amazement, they fell into easy conversation about Tom's recent fishing trip. No pretension, no social posturing, just two grandfathers sharing stories. Later, I overheard my mother asking Susan for her peach cobbler recipe, with what appeared to be genuine interest rather than polite obligation. That evening, after all guests had departed, and Lucas was asleep surrounded by new toys, Jessica and I sat on our back porch reflecting on the day. "They're really trying," she observed, a note of surprise still evident in her voice. "They are," I agreed. "I'm not sure they even recognize themselves anymore." "Do you think it will last?" she asked the question that still lingered despite the progress. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "But I'm starting to think that's okay. We've built something strong enough to withstand whatever comes, good or bad." 2 weeks later, my father called with an unexpected request. He wanted to meet privately, not to discuss money or family obligations, but to talk. Just talk. We met at a local park, walking slowly along paths lined with spring flowers. He seemed nervous, uncharacteristically hesitant, as we made small talk about the weather and Lucas's latest achievements. Finally, he stopped at a bench overlooking a small pond and sat heavily. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice unsteady. "Something I should have said years ago." I sat beside him, waiting. "I'm proud of you, Maynard," he said, the words emerging with difficulty. "Not because of what you've accomplished, though that's remarkable, but because of who you've become, despite my best efforts to make you someone else." The admission hung between us, more valuable than any financial support or social connection he could have offered. "I spent my life chasing approval from people who didn't matter," he continued, measuring success in dollars and connections rather than relationships and character. "I nearly lost you in the process. Nearly missed knowing my grandson. Nearly," I emphasized. But not completely. No, he agreed, a small smile forming. Thanks to you establishing consequences I couldn't ignore. It's ironic. You became a better man by rejecting my example rather than following it. We sat in silence for several minutes, watching ducks glide across the pond's surface. The counseling is helping, he admitted. Your mother and I are talking about things we've never discussed in 40 years of marriage. It's uncomfortable as hell, but necessary. Growth usually is uncomfortable, I observed. When did you get so wise? He asked, only half joking. When I stopped trying to earn love and started building a life where it was freely given, I answered. On our son's 3rd birthday, we held a vow renewal ceremony. The wedding celebration Jessica and I had been denied years earlier. This time, my parents sat in the front row, my mother shedding uncharacteristic tears as we exchanged promises for the future. Jessica's parents welcomed them without reservation, the two families blending in ways I could never have imagined possible. At the reception, my father approached me with a small box. This isn't a peace offering or an attempt to buy forgiveness, he said carefully. Just something I want you to have. Inside was his father's pocket watch, a family heirloom I'd admired as a child, but had never expected to inherit. No strings attached, he assured me. No expectations. Just a father giving his son something meaningful. As Lucas grows older, he's developing relationships with all his grandparents, based on genuine connection rather than obligation or performance. He'll never know the conditional world I grew up in, where love was a currency to be earned rather than a gift freely given. The Tesla that sparked this journey still sits in our driveway, though it's no longer the newest or most impressive model available. I could easily upgrade, but I've chosen not to. It reminds me daily of how material things can be both meaningless and profoundly significant depending on what they represent. For my parents, that car initially represented a financial resource they desperately needed. For me, it became a symbol of success achieved on my own terms. But ultimately, its greatest value was as the catalyst for healing wounds I'd given up hope of ever addressing. I've learned that true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts or possessions. It's found in the freedom to live authentically, to create boundaries that protect what matters most, and to offer forgiveness not because it's deserved, but because it liberates the one who gives it. My family story didn't end with estrangement or revenge. Instead, it evolved into something more complex and ultimately more rewarding, a journey of transformation for everyone involved. Not perfect, still occasionally difficult, but real in a way that our previous relationship never was. That's the lesson I hope to pass to my son. That genuine connections built on mutual respect and unconditional love are the only true measure of success. That standing firm in your values isn't selfish. It's necessary for authentic relationships to flourish. And that sometimes, the greatest act of love is setting boundaries that allow everyone the space to become their best selves. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members who couldn't respect your choices? How did you balance compassion with self-protection? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this journey resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share with someone who might need to hear that they're not alone in navigating complex family dynamics. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, sometimes the hardest conversations lead to the most meaningful connections.